Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Drop a Stitch podcast.
I'm your host, Natalie.
And I'm your other host, Denny.
And today we're going to talk about how to read a yarn label.
And everything that you need to know to
pick the proper yarn
for your project.
And how different yarns will affect it.
Mm-hmm.
But before we get into that...
How was your week?
Good. How was yours?
It was good. I had 2 markets this weekend.
That's good.
And they were freaking good. They were good. Both of them.
I had one.
Yeah.
It was pretty good too. It was the best one I've done so far.
Yeah.
On my own.
Yes. Because Natalie has been helping me with markets since I was pregnant with Isabella. Because, I couldn't do everything by myself. I needed a little help. And then, I think then it's when you got the taste
Yes.
of markets.
I wanted to do markets.
Yeah.
But I'm just a chicken in life in general. I feel I need someone to push me.
Yeah.
I was a chicken, and then I went with you, and I was like, oh, okay, this is not as bad as I made it out to be in my head.
Yeah.
And then I was like, okay,
Well, you had like a panic?
Well, it's just like it's so much to plan and to organize and figure out at the beginning.
I mean, yeah. Also, if you hear clicking, this is a knitting and crochet podcast. We are currently knitting and crocheting.
Yes.
So, but
as one does.
Of course. But beside the markets, how was your week?
It was
in
really
general?
good. It was really good. It's crunch time before Christmas and before the holidays, so trying to do a bit of Christmas shopping and finish all the projects I have to finish at work.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
And it's super busy, but it's good. I can see the end.
At the light at the end of the tunnel. For me, I feel like it's so busy that weeks just fly by.
Yeah.
They're like a blur.
Yeah.
I don't even notice, and it's freaking Sunday again.
And at the same time, they take forever because you're like, oh, like, is this going to end? Can I, like, rest? And then it's like, oh, shoot, it's Sunday again.
Yeah. I have a little bit of market hangover.
Yeah, it's been 3 weekends in a row for you.
Yes. The whole, every single weekend of December, I had a market. I have one more to go, and then I'm good. But I still love doing markets.
Of course.
That's the thing. So, but overall, it's been good. Just busy. Yeah. Extremely busy.
I forget every year how busy it is right before Christmas. Like every year I'm like, oh, this year I'm going to have time. Like I'm going to do my shopping early. God. And I did for the most part this year. But then it's like these last like 4 or 5 little items that I didn't think about while I was out the first time. And I'm like, oh, I need to get this. And like it just, yeah.
Yeah. No, and for me too, I always say, I'm going to make maybe like a hat or 2 per week starting in January or maybe March, so then I have plenty of stock by the end of the year. That never happens. No. Never, ever, ever, ever happens.
No, because you're done markets, you're done Christmas season, and then you're like, it's time to knit for myself. And then you do. And then it's summer, and you're like, ugh, it's too warm, I don't feel like it.
Well, in my case, I can knit for myself or for my kids. It's always for my blog, the pattern, and because this is my job.
Yeah, that's true.
I need to, like, my goal is to upload a new pattern every week.
That's insane.
I know it sounds crazy, but I don't tend to do like these big garments and big things. For me, are all small things like accessories or hats or headbands, like things or home decor, things that are small, so they're not that hard. And here and there, I'm gonna throw like a cardigan or something like that, but it's not my main. The things that I do the most, so it's not that terrible. But okay, let's get into
yarn labels.
Yes, yarn labels. Okay, so we have in here little notes, and we're gonna go point by point. Should we like timestamp it? So we put in the description when starts what point.
Sure. Yeah, let's do that. That's a good idea.
Well, so
that'll make it easier for people to find what they're looking for.
Yes, and if they want, if they don't want to listen to the whole thing, but
which they should.
Yes, they should. But sometimes you just want to find one specific thing, and
Like when you've listened to the whole episode and then you get in the store and you forget one part.
Exactly.
Okay.
So
I understand. That's a good idea.
yeah, we can do that. So then we can add the points.
Okay. Perfect.
Okay. So we're gonna start with yarn brands.
Yes. The first thing you'll notice on your yarn label, and it's usually what's written in the biggest, is going to be the brand of the yarn. Sorry. There's, I guess, two companies that are like the biggest of what you can find in most retail store.
If you are in Canada or the US.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess I don't know in every country. I haven't had the pleasure of yarn shopping in every country.
No, but even English speaking people in the UK or Europe, it's different. They don't have,
that is very true.
I don't think, these kind of yarns.
Well, but here in Northern America,
yes,
we have two main brands, which are Lion Brand Yarn and Yarnspiration. And then obviously you have all the more specialized yarns like merino wool and all that stuff that you can find in like mostly local yarn store, which have different kind of labels, but I think that for this episode we'll stick to like what you can find in like bigger retail store, Walmart's, Michael's, like all that kind of stuff.
What's it called? Joanne
in the States, yes.
States.
So basically where you go when you start knitting, like you kind of tend to go for like a bit of a less expensive yarn. And so we'll start with those yarn labels. And there's also like home brand companies, I guess you can call them. Like at the grocery store you have like, you know, the no name, and each grocery store has its own thing. It's kind of the same thing for yarn.
Yeah. Michael's.
Like, has loops and threads.
Yeah.
And Joanne has one too in the States, but I forget what it is.
Isn't I Love These whatever? Or no?
That's Hobby Lobby, I think.
But that's their home brand?
I don't know if they're home brand, but I know that it sells it there.
Yeah.
Wait, I don't really know.
Yeah, not me neither.
There's another one. I bought some yarn when I went to Joanne in the States the last time, and they had a whole section of this type of yarn.
Loops and threads, though, at Michael's, I feel like they tried really hard to copy the big brands.
Yes, for
yarn.
Sure. For sure.
And try to sell it for cheaper, but the quality is also cheaper.
Yeah.
Most of the time.
It's not the same quality, but if you're just beginning crocheting or knitting or crocheting, yes. I feel like that's kind of where you go. Yeah. And as we walk through all the different information that you can find on the yarn label, we'll kind of give you a little bit more details on how that will impact your project and how you help you basically make a decision. Because when you first walk into a store and you start looking at yarn and you realize there's 4 aisles and a gajillion colors, it's very overwhelming and you have no idea what you're doing. So first thing, if you're looking for a specific yarn, there's going to be the yarn brand or the company that makes the yarn, and then there's going to be the type, like the name of that specific yarn.
Yeah, so each brand will have like a, what's it called? What's the name? It's not the category, is...
The model?
No, it's not the model. So, for example, Yarn Inspiration has Bernat, and then it has this other one.
But Yarn Inspiration is kind of different because Yarn Inspiration is like the name of the company, and then they have different types of yarn. And but there's Bernat like blanket yarn, there's Bernat like home deck, there's Bernat handicrafter, like under the Bernat umbrella. But they also have other ones. Yeah,
but what I was saying is that Yarn Inspiration has different categories, has different... what's the name? I have it at the tip of my tongue.
Yeah, same.
I hate when this happens. The company has...
Like sub-companies, I guess?
No, it's not sub-companies. It's... okay, I'm gonna remember at some point, but it's like the big company has mini companies.
Yeah.
Within the sub companies, so Yarn Inspirations is the big one, and then they have lines, I guess, could be.
Yeah, lines would be a good way. Yeah.
Like lines, so they have the Bernat line with all the Bernat categories. And then they have, what's the other one that Yarn Inspiration has? Oh my gosh. Okay, again.
We're just brain
fog.
I'm trying to look through
I
your
know,
yarns.
I'm trying to look through my yarn too. Like, I'm sure I have.
Oh yeah, you for sure have. There's no way. There's other ones.
Okay. I go to their Instagram because we need to know this. Is gonna kill me if we don't. And like we use this what are they called? All the time. So if you go to Yarn Inspiration, if you go to their Instagram,
Karen is one.
yes, Karen,
Red Heart.
Where
were we?
I know.
Red Heart, yeah.
Peyton's
is another one.
Lily Sugar.
Yeah.
Yeah, so
There's a bunch.
yes,
There's a bunch.
it's a bunch.
Yeah, so Yarn Inspiration has a bunch of differents.
Yes.
And then it doesn't really matter what you grab from any of them. We'll kind of walk through all the different things. Lion Brand is a little bit different. Lion Brand is like the company, and then they have different types of yarns. So they'll have like
cotton,
woolies, and they'll have like a bunch of different like mandala and like whatever types of yarn, really. But yeah, so that's mainly if you're looking for something specific that your pattern calls for, start with the brand, and then the line if there is one, and then the the name of that specific yarn.
Yes.
And then the second thing you want to look at, especially if you're changing, if you're not taking the exact yarn that is specified in the pattern, is the weight of the yarn.
Okay, but 1 second. Should we, before we dive into the specifics of the yarn, should we tell them how choosing the yarn is going to affect their project? Or should we say that at the end?
I feel like as we go through all the different categories, we can explain how that affects.
Okay.
What do you think?
Yeah. Okay, so next point.
Yarn weight. So basically on every skein of yarn, there's a drawing of a tiny little skein of yarn with a number. And that number basically refers to the size of the yarn.
So how thick or thin it's going to be.
Exactly. You have number 1, which is super fine, number 2, which is fine, number 3, which is DK, number 4, which is worsted, number 5, which is bulky, number 6, which is super bulky, and I think there's even number 7 for jumbo.
Yeah. But is it like that everywhere though? Because I feel like
in most companies, and that's why I said at the beginning, like, we're going to stick with, like, the more retail kind of things. Because, obviously, if you go to yarn stores and they come from all over the world, they're rated a bunch of different ways.
Yes.
So, but if you're starting out and you don't know how to read a yarn label, most likely
try to find
for, like, something, like, from a big box store rather than, like, a local yarn store, just to get started and kind of understand the impact of how everything that we'll explain today on the yarn label will have on your pattern. And so, yeah.
Okay, so what we wanted to say with the yarn weight is, depending on what you want to make, it's what you need to choose. So if you're looking for winter projects, you want to go for the bulky or super bulky yarn. Not necessarily, but most likely.
Yes, it depends. Basically, in the pattern that you will choose, it will be most likely indicated whether it's a worsted, a super bulky, a bulky, or whatever. And then from there, like, that's kind of the first thing you want to look at. What is the yarn that they're asking for? And then try to find a yarn in that category that's, like, the basics. Because if, as Danny gave as an example, I think before in one of the previous episodes, if she makes a pattern for a super bulky number 6 yarn weight, and you like a hat, for instance, and you like, you know, a number 4 worsted weight yarn, and choose that instead, your hat's not going to come out the same size.
Oh, you're going to make a baby hat.
Yeah, it's using a tiny yarn versus a big yarn. So obviously there's going to be a size difference. So that's the first thing you kind of want to look at.
You need to keep that in mind every single time that you are especially if you're a new knitter or crocheter, because like I said in the previous episode, that happens to me as a designer all the time. Like every single time people are saying, oh, like I made it and it barely fits my 1-year-old or 2 years old. And my first question is always, did you use the same materials that I said in my pattern that I specified? Did you use super bulky weight? Did you use the size needle? Because sometimes even the size needles, if you change it, they were like
Needle size.
the needles or the crochet, they would be, oh no, I didn't have a 6.5. Let's say I used a 6. And I'm like, even that 0.5
Can make
a big difference, especially if you crochet way tighter or way looser than me. That's the other thing that you should check is the gauge, but we're gonna get into that later
in a different episode.
But choosing your yarn and checking the pattern, you need to go for, if you can use the same yarn that they're using,
especially if you're a beginner.
Ideally,
look at patterns, Google your local retail store, and try to find a yarn that you can have access to easily and is the exact same as in the pattern. It will be the easiest way when you get started.
One tip that I want to give you guys is, if you don't have a pattern, if you want to buy one or try to find one for free, whatever, if you have a specific yarn at home already and you're like, oh, I want to use this yarn because I don't want to buy another one until I use the starch that I have, which we all know that's not true. But if you want to do that, go to Ravelry. And in Ravelry, you can actually type the name of the yarn that you have, and you're going to get a bunch of projects that are made with that specific yarn.
Yeah.
So that's a great way to use the yarn that you already have. But if not, try it if you can to get the same yarn that the pattern is calling for. That's going to be the easiest way for you.
Yeah. And if you can't find and you absolutely want to do this pattern, the first thing you look at is the yarn weight. You want to get something that is the same yarn weight. And even if the pattern specifies for a number 5 bulky and you get a number 5 bulky, it is possible that it's not exactly the same size. You have to understand that yarn goes from a piece of string to this gigantic
a dental, what's it called? Floss.
From dental floss to this gigantic 1-inch diameter piece of yarn.
It's
the
crazy.
Jumbo can be massive.
Okay,
we've all seen these massive arm knitted blankets.
Oh yes,
a couple of years ago when they were doing their rounds. There's a massive difference. So every yarn weight has a range, so you can have a worsted weight that is on the thinner side or on the thicker side.
That's what I wanted to say. Remember the other day when I was making that, by the way, I need to finish my daughter's this pattern that I bought from Petite Knit.
Yeah.
The romper.
Romper, yeah.
So I bought, it calls for a number 1 or fingering weight, which is ridiculously thin. And if you know me just a little bit, you know that I hate working with that yarn.
You just don't have the patience.
I don't have the patience for once. I love the look though, because it's so drapey. What's it?
Drapey, yeah.
It's so beautiful.
It has the greatest drape.
Yes, it's so beautiful, but I just don't have the patience to work with that kind of yarn. But anyways, I bought the yarn, which is a fingering weight. It's beautiful. I started working with it, and then I went to Knit Picks. And I seen another fingering weight yarn with a color that it's way more me. It was like a warm.
You didn't tell me this.
I showed you the yarn.
The new one?
Yes.
I don't think so.
I did.
Okay, well maybe I just.
I can swear I did. It was like these.
What color is it?
The same, almost the same one that you're working with.
Not showing me that. It was purpley the last time you showed me.
Yeah, that's the one that I'm working with, that I bought at Michael's.
Yes, that's the original one.
The original one. And then I bought one when I needed to get my super jumbo knitting needles.
No, you did not tell me this.
Oh my goodness. Yes, because I asked you if you had the needles.
Yes, and then I didn't have the needles, but then you ordered. By the time I told you that I didn't have the needles, you had already ordered.
Yes.
Well, you didn't tell me you ordered yarn with it.
Okay.
Of course you did. I mean, let's be real.
Okay. Of course. I ordered because it's a very beautiful, burnt orange. So me. that I was like, okay, I really want the romper to be in this color. And I ordered it, and it seemed a little bit like chunkier.
Okay.
And I was like, I would 100% prefer to work with this yarn because it's a little bit chunkier. And maybe the other one is not fingering, and it's something like that doesn't exist, and it's thinner than fingering.
Yeah.
But
actually, it does exist. There is a weight 0.
Really?
Yeah.
It's
like lace or
lace?
something.
Yeah. Ugh. Anyways. No. And then I was like, okay, hold on. They both say fingering way.
Mm-hmm.
But one is like way chunkier than the other one.
Yeah. So
how is this possible? And if I use the one that I really want, it's gonna the project is gonna be bigger. So then,
okay. So I can down in the other categories that we'll talk about, I can give you explanations for that. But basically, if that helps, the way that they use to categorize the yarn within whatever yarn weight it is, 0 to 7, it's basically they take, I don't know exactly the dimension, but they take like a dowel or a pencil or a pen or whatever it is, and then they wrap the yarn around it.
Yes.
And within 1 inch, it's called a wrap per inch. They count how many wraps they can do within that 1 inch.
I've seen it.
And it's, I don't know the numbers, but for worsted, and I'm just tossing any random numbers, it's like between 12 and 16.
Oh, so
it makes a difference, but it's whatever's between that,
Okay.
and then that's how they know that it is. So there is a range. And so, and then even like, that's why like number 7 is the most unreliable yarn weight you'll ever see, because it's anything bigger than a certain amount. So you can literally have like a decent yarn that's not like so big. Like you can have something that's like 1 inch in diameter. Like it's ridiculous the range in that.
Yeah.
It's just because they haven't developed any further yarn weights. But so basically that's how they get to classify them from 0 to 7.
That's
is by
so
doing the wraps
interesting.
per inch. And so there is a difference. So, but
I think I seen a video the other day, somebody doing that, and I was like, oh, that's so interesting. But I didn't know that that was actually the way that they categorize.
that is how they categorize it. So, yeah. So to backtracking, resume all of this. If you're new, try to find the exact same yarn. That will make it a lot easier. If you cannot and you absolutely want to do this project, the first thing you want to look at is the yarn weight, the little ball of yarn with the number at the back. Try to match that. That will already put you in the proper category.
Yes.
Then another thing that's very important to look at is the fiber content. And this is the next point. So there's a gajillion options as far as fiber content. The cheapest option and the most available is acrylic.
Yes, man-made.
Yes, it's man-made. Then there is a variety of acrylic blends that contain acrylic fibers, wool, or whatever other natural fiber blends.
Yeah, it's a small percentage. Like mostly will be
80-20. Sometimes it's 50-50.
Sometimes 50-50. Yeah, you're right. Cozy wool.
Yeah, it's 50-50.
Which is amazing. But
Woolies is 80-20. It kind of depends on,
Mm-hmm.
So, and then you have the more natural fibers, such as like cotton, such as silk, such as wool. So, and depending on the fiber that you're choosing, it will affect how dense or not dense your pattern is and how drapey it is. Because, for example, cotton is very stiff generally. It holds its shape very well.
unless,
What?
well, there's two difference I want to say with cotton, and I want to give you guys an example. A few years ago, one of my very, very first projects and patterns that I ever made was a crochet cardigan. And I wanted to do a cotton one because it was summer, and I remember it's one of my most popular videos. I taught everybody how to make it with your own measurements. So that was, anybody can make it for their own sizes, including like babies, kids, whatever. And I used the Bernat Handicrafter, hold on.
These, yeah.
Huge. Is it a handicrafter?
Yeah.
Okay. The huge, ginormous
balls of
ball.
handicrafter. Yeah.
And you can imagine how my cardigan. It was beautiful, but it was heavy.
That too.
It was heavy and it was stiff. But if I used mercerized cotton,
yes,
like Lion Brand 24/7, for example, my cardigan would have had so much more drape. It would have been lighter, still with that cotton feeling, which is very nice, but it would have made a huge difference. So within the different fibers, you can also find different ways that the yarn is made, and that also is going to impact your project.
Yes, and how it feels too.
Yeah.
Like merino wool and
regular wool.
Regular wool is not the same at all. And then, so it will impact your gauge. It will impact the denseness of your fabric that you're creating. It will impact the feel of it. But you also, when you're looking at fibers, and it doesn't really matter if you're just starting out, but you'll catch on to all of these things as you keep knitting and crocheting. But the different fibers have different properties. As Danny mentioned, you want to use a cotton for a summer cardigan because cotton is a lot more breathable than wool will keep your warmth. So you want to use wool in the winter. You want to use, so depending on the fibers that you're using, it has different properties. If you're, for instance, making a pot holder or something to put something warm on, like as home decor or whatever, you don't want to use anything with acrylic because it will melt. Cotton is safe. Yeah. All this work and it's melted in a pile of plastic because that's what acrylic is.
Oh my God.
So
yes, it is.
Like your fiber will impact a lot the result of your project. So I would say if you're starting out, try to find the same yarn. If you can't, try to find something in the same yarn weight category and the same fiber content.
Yes.
If you can match as best as you can the fiber content, the chances that you will have a similar result will be better.
Yes.
I don't know how many times I've seen patterns for sweaters made in these beautiful cashmere yarns.
Oh my
and
gosh.
I'm like, the drape looks amazing. I'm going to make it. But we don't have at least I don't have access to cashmere yarn.
Yeah.
Most of the brands that they use are overseas for us, and they would cost so much money to get just the yarn on top of all the shipping and everything and all the delays. So I never end up getting it, and I'll find something similar in a different blend, and the drape is never the same.
Oh no,
never the same. You can just tell in the picture it's stiffer. It's not the same. Same with mohair or something like that.
Yeah.
You have to do your best to match the fiber content.
Yeah. Another, sorry to interrupt you.
Go ahead.
Another example that I want to give you guys that it just happened to me 2 weeks ago.
Yes, your little sock.
Yeah, my little stocking. I made it. The original pattern was with cotton, the handicrafter. And it just turned out so perfect, beautiful, amazing. The gift card fit and everything. And then it is categorized as a 4 worsted weight. And so then I was like, okay, I have a bunch of little pieces of acrylic yarn from my hats, headbands, or whatever.
That are also worsted.
That are also worsted. So it's the same category. But it is not the same fiber content. So I made the stocking, the little mini stocking with acrylic, and it was a teeny tiny stocking. I was like, there's no way a gift card will fit in here. And I was like, okay, so what do I do? Because I made the pattern for a category 4, but now I have to specify that it's gotta be cotton. Because if not, if you make it with acrylic, you're gonna be super disappointed because your gift card is not gonna fit.
Yeah.
So even though it is the same category, it does not have the same results.
Exactly. And the fiber plays a role in that. So very important to look at that as well. It will play a big impact on your project, and as you get further into it, you'll start experimenting and understanding what each fiber does and like its qualities and disadvantages and what you use it for and what you don't.
Yeah.
So like don't stress about understanding everything at the beginning. I think for when I started, that was kind of like, well, there's so much information to retain to just be able to buy a ball of yarn.
Yeah.
Don't. Look at the weight, look at the fiber, and then
Try
start
to
from there.
just try to match it. I feel like the best way for you to do it would be, you know, every pattern will always say, or most likely it should say, the yarn that they used.
Yeah.
So if you like it, like we have been saying, if you can get the exact same yarn, you're safe.
Yeah.
Just go grab whatever color you want. And if not, like Natalie's saying, try to match as best as you can the fiber content and the weight of the yarn.
Yes, and a great trip if you're trying to do that. There's a website called yarnsub.com.
Really?
And yeah, you don't know this, girl?
No.
Yes, it's called yarnsub.com, and you basically enter in the yarn that you're looking for. And it doesn't have every yarn, but it has a lot of the most like popular yarns basically. So you enter it what you're looking for, and it will give you matches it will give you like the closest match all the way to like, I mean, you can keep going for pages and pages, but basically it'll be like 92% match. This yarn matches the exact fiber contact, the exact this, the exact that, like, so sizing and everything. And then it will tell you the differences. So it will say like, in this different bowl of yarn, there is less yardage. So for each one that you would have needed of the other one, take 2 of this one, for instance.
Stop right now. How
do you not
where
know this?
in the world do you find all these websites? Do you remember last year
Yes,
when you
your
helped
color.
me for my color, my
color work, scarf,
shawl, whatever?
shawl, yeah.
I can't believe I'm forgetting the name of my patterns. But anyways, my summer shawl, summer nights, I think I call it shawl. I was burning my brain
Trying to plan
trying
stripes.
to plan and, you know, check, okay, what color after what color and how many rows,
to
whatever.
make it look random.
Yes,
by planning it.
and to make it look nice. And there comes Natalie. She's like, oh, just look at this website. Okay, how many colors? How many rows? How many blah blah? And then boom, just
Layout
randomly,
done.
magically, this website made you all the color combinations in the world, and I could even pick which one I like the best. Where do you find all these websites?
I don't know. I come across like, I don't know. I come across things and then I'm just like, ooh, this is good information. And then I note it down and then I end up going back to it somehow.
And they're part of your life.
Yeah. Once you discover something is life-changing as that,
Oh
that
my
doesn't
God.
work for you.
Okay,
You don't want to go back.
We're gonna link these websites in the description so you guys can check both of them. But they are life changing.
Yeah. So Yarn Sub is really fun. And it will give you the variable. So that's a great tip as well. If you're just starting and you're unsure. The one thing I don't like about it is that you can't enter 2 yarns and have them compared. And it will really try to get you to have the same fabric content. Like if you're looking for an alternative for a cashmere, it will just only give you cashmeres.
Okay.
So it doesn't help you if you're like, no, I don't want cashmere. I want something else that looks kind of like it. It's not helpful for that. But it will be helpful for matching the same fiber, which is if you're just starting out, that's what you want to do, and in most cases that's what you want to do anyway. So great website.
Fantastic. Now the next point is the yardage. Yardage. And like Natalie was saying, each ball of yarn will have different yardage.
Yes.
And some, for example, even within the same brand and the same category or whatever, or line, you will have bigger balls, smaller balls, and sometimes... Yes, go ahead.
Sorry. Even like the colors, solid colors, balls of yarn tend to have more yardage than heathered colors or
variegated.
Yeah. So that's something to note as well. But yeah, on your yarn label, you will find 2 very important information. You'll have the yardage and the meters, which is basically the length of yarn that you have. And then you'll have the net weight, which is either ounces or grams, and it's how much it weighs. So it's very interesting. That's another way to compare the weights of the yarn too. You're trying to get a yarn that has a similar yardage for a similar weight. If, like, let's say I'm looking at this one we have here, it's 5 ounces for 87 yards. And if I have another ball of yarn that has like 4 ounces for 90 yards, well, I know that it's not going to be the same drape because the numbers are not close enough.
Yeah. And also, you also always have to check both numbers. I'm going to talk with grams and meters because that's what I use most of the time. I don't use ounces or yards.
I use grams and yards most of the time.
Yes?
Yes.
Okay, I use grams and meters. So anyways, if a pattern it's giving you both information, try to check the yarn that you want to use that has also both informations, because if I find one ball of yarn that has let's say 140 grams, but then the other one, like you said, it's in the thinner side of that yarn category, probably is gonna have, I don't know, 200 grams, and it's the same, so you're gonna have more yarn. But what happens in the opposite side? If you're grabbing one yarn that is in the thinner side and you need more, does that make sense?
Yes, I know what you mean.
You know,
like, so let's say both balls of yarn have 100 yards or meter, whatever it is.
Yeah.
If one of them has 140 grams and the other one has 200 grams, the yarn that has 200 grams for the same length is thicker than the yarn that has the same length but less grams, because it's thinner because it weighs less.
Yeah, but not just that, but the one, maybe I'm just getting confused in here, but the one that has, for example, because both numbers are super important.
Yes.
Because if one has 80 meters, if I just go with the grams, the other one might be longer because it has more yardage, more meters.
Okay, so if you're changing yarn from the pattern, yes. So what you want to do then, let's say your pattern calls for, I don't know, 200 yards. And the balls of yarn are
Yeah, it's kind of confusing.
It is. Listen, we've been doing this for years and we're still confused. I know what you mean. But mainly, okay, the rule of thirds that I wanted to explain is, okay, if your pattern, normally when a pattern calls for something, I'll look more at the yardage or
than
meters than the weight, because that's ultimately what's most important. You need the proper length to be able to knit your project.
Yes.
However, the weight is also important, especially if you're matching fibers. If you're not matching fibers, the weight means nothing, because cotton is a lot heavier than acrylic, for instance. But if you're matching fibers, the weight will help give you an idea if you're in the same range in that yarn category. If you're not, if your pattern calls for, let's say, 200 yards of a certain type of yarn, and for instance, you found this yarn that you want to use, and it is, let's say, 50 yards to make it easy. Well, you know that for, like, if one ball of yarn that they were using is 200 yards and you have only 50 yards in your ball of yarn, you need to do like the cross. So you would do 50 times 1 divided by 200. Do I have that right? And then it would give you, I didn't do that right.
No, you did.
I did that right?
Just listening.
And it would give you the amount of yarn that you would need, the amount of like balls of yarn that you would need, which in this case would be 4.
Yeah.
And then related to that, if whatever number you end up as the amount that you would need is like 3.63 or something like that, you need to round up, never down. Always get more than not enough.
Yeah.
And if you're knitting bigger projects or even smaller projects, if you're starting and your tension isn't super even or your gauge is not perfect, get one more ball of yarn.
Always.
At the retail store, you can return them if you haven't used them, so it's not like you're, wasting any money. And you never know, like, and especially if you're close, like if the pattern calls for, 198 yards and your ball has 200, get a second one.
Yeah.
There's nothing worse than being mid-project and running out of yarn and then finding out that they don't have it in stock anymore or whatever the case is. Which,
etc.
Do you have anything else to add to this point?
No, I don't.
Because that leads us to the next point. The next point is lot number.
And this goes if you are making a project that requires more than one skein.
Yes. If you're just one skein, it doesn't matter.
Yeah, if you're just making a hat, then it doesn't matter.
Again, hold on. There's certain hats that take more than one ball of yarn.
Really?
Yes.
Oh, I guess
Like if you're
making a double brim beanie, maybe.
Yeah, or you're using whatever yarn. Like some yarns don't have a lot per ball.
Okay.
Especially the fancy ones.
If you're just making a coaster, probably you're just
Yeah, you won't need it. If you're making anything small and it's under a ball of yarn, you're good to go.
Yeah. If you're making a project that requires 2+ balls of yarn,
Yeah.
pay attention to the lot number.
Yes. And this number is normally not written in super big. You kind of have to find it. On some yarns, it's right by the barcode. Most of the time, actually, it's kind of right by the barcode. And it's going to tell you the number of the lot of the dye of that yarn. So when they make the yarn, they will do it in batches. Obviously, they will make so many a day and then so many like a month later or whatever it is, and that number will tell you if this yarn was made at the same time as the different ball of yarn. And you want to get as much as you can the same numbers, and if not, the closest numbers you can find, because they were made around the same time, and therefore there's more chances that the colors stay the same. And trust me on this, because I've done this multiple times. If you do not get the proper lot number, or if you're like, I'm going to be fine with 3 balls, whatever, and then you need a 4th, and they no longer have that lot number, and you're stuck buying another one, there is a high chance on certain yarns, a low chance on others, but you will see a noticeable difference in the color.
Yeah, and the color change.
And you don't
line.
Yeah, you don't quite notice it necessarily right away when you're knitting, but you'll put your project down, go to pick it back up, and you're like,
yeah,
there's a line, and there's nothing you can do about it.
Yeah.
Aside from finding the proper yarn lot. And that leads me to another point, which is I've bought yarn before that had the mention on it, no dye lot, meaning that they should all be the exact same. That is not true. I've had to rip out an entire project because I had 3 different colors in the same yarn, same brand, bought at the same time.
Oh my god.
That had no dye lot, but they were clearly not the same, and it was just barely noticeable. The most frustrating thing is I was knitting this at night, and I didn't see it because it was nighttime and I was watching TV, and it was a very repetitive project and I wasn't looking at it closely. And even if I was, it was dark enough that I wouldn't notice the difference.
Oh yeah.
And the next day I'm like, ooh, I'm gonna take a progress picture, and I put it out in the sun and I was like,
oh my god.
Yes. And then I ripped out the part that had a different color, took another ball of yarn, re-knitted it, only to realize it was the same thing, and the 2 colors were not the same either. So I frogged the entire project.
Oh no.
Yeah. So very, very, very important. Buy the proper amount of yarn balls that you need, and even a little bit of extra if you're scared or you're unsure or it requires a lot, get a few extras and match the yarn lots.
Yes.
The lot numbers. You do not want to make this mistake.
No, because it's gonna be noticeable, and you are gonna be so frustrated after whenever you see that your color has a little line, and you, trust me, you're gonna notice it.
Yes, and other people will too. And somehow it shows up so much more in pictures than anything else. So
for sure.
Even if you're like, it's not that bad, I'll still wear it. Anytime anyone will take a picture, that is all you will see.
Yeah, for sure.
So lot number.
And then our last point for the yarn label is the gauge information plus the recommended needle or crochet hook size.
Yes. So on every single ball of yarn, or most of them at least, you will have little squares that tell you how many stitches and row simple knitters were able to get in a 4-inch by 4-inch square. So if you don't know, when you're gauging, most pattern, or at least any good pattern, should have a gauge, and it should tell you how many stitches and how many rows you need to be able to make in what stitch in a 4x4 square. And that's for you to confirm that the yarn that you got and the needle or crochet hook size that you're using is correct, so that whatever you produce will be the same size as whoever designed the pattern.
And why is this super important? It's because we are all different humans and we all knit and crochet very differently. So we realized this with the stuffies that we were making. Yes. So we made the stuffies, the classic dinosaurs. I don't know if you guys have seen them on Instagram. They're all over the place. Mm-hmm. But we made the stuffies. I made a dinosaur and a bunny, and Natalie made the same ones. And she was like, you brought it one time to my house. Mm-hmm. And I was like, well, these look very, very small. And you were like, well, that's how it's supposed to be. And I was like, what do you mean? I just made the mini one and it's like half of the size bigger. Mm-hmm. And you were like, no, Dani, it's supposed to be this size. And we even measure it because the pattern said like it should be whatever
this
length.
Pattern doesn't have a gauge, which is frustrating. Yeah. But it has the finished dimension that your project should be.
Yeah, so yours matched perfectly and mine was bigger. So because we're all different, we all knit or crochet differently. So I tend to knit and crochet looser. Mm-hmm. And you probably do it tighter. Mm-hmm. So if we were to make the same pattern and we don't gauge swatch, we are probably going to have what we had already.
Yes.
The same project with two completely different sizes.
Yes, and to give you kind of a range of how bad it could be or how like different it could be. And I'm not sure if I remember correctly, but I believe it was supposed to be either 15 or 18 inches tall, this stuffy.
Yeah, and mine was like 30.
Yours and mine had 3 inches of difference, which is not a lot, but it's still a lot. Like if you're making a beanie or a hat or a garment, and 3 inches is massive of a difference.
Oh yeah, for sure.
3 inches on a hat is from like newborn to adult almost. Yeah. 3 inches on a sweater is like a size up or down or 2 sizes up or down. Yeah. So it's very, very important that your gauge matches. So although the yarn label will not tell you what your gauge will be, because only you can say that depending on how you're tight or loose you knit, which is called your tension. Yeah. It will give you an idea of what it should be. So you can kind of look, and oftentimes patterns will have roughly the same size of needles or hook as the yarn label, or very similar, unless they're trying to create a very different look by having something extra loose or extra tight. But generally most things are kind of in that range, up or down a couple millimeter size, but generally that. So it kind of gives you an idea. When I'm looking, I'm like, okay, in this pattern I need to use like 9mm needles and I need to have 10 stitches and 12 rows. So if I'm looking at this yarn and it's 9 stitches and 12 rows, I'm like, okay, that's close enough. It's only one away. I can probably match that, Yeah. So that's kind of a good way to start off and kind of get a good idea of, as a last resort, to get a good idea. And if you're working on something that doesn't have a pattern, you're just designing something yourself, it's also a good way to kind of get a hint at what like hook or needle size you should use. And then you can, do a little test square and then see like, oh, this is looser than I would want it to be, go down or go up. Yeah, but it's a good starting point. That
happened with the same shawl that we were talking about with the colors. Mm-hmm. I was doing a little swatch and I was using, I wanted it to be super drapey. Drapey. I wanted to be super drapey. I wanted to have like this beautiful flow. And that's something that you also gonna be learning as you get more into the knitting and crochet world. At some point, you're not even gonna need to read the yarn label to know what hook size or needle you need or want, depending on the project that you want to make. So I wasn't looking for the yarn label. I was swatching and testing for the perfect drape. Mm-hmm. And it happened that I was using a crochet hook that was way bigger, so my stitch looked very like wonky and super extremely loose. That's something that it's also going to happen if you use, you know, bigger sizes. Your stitches are not going to be as nice and as noticeable. So I remember I showed it to you and you were like, yeah, no, this look way looser than, you know, what you should.
You were using kind of a lacy stitch and we were losing the effect of the lace. Like we couldn't see the stitch very well because it was too loose.
Yeah. So then I went down, I don't know if it was 0.5 or a whole millimeter.
I think it was a whole millimeter.
A whole millimeter. And then that changed everything. Like then the stitch looked so much nicer and it still had that drape that I wanted to, but the stitch definition was way better.
Yeah, so it was like the best of both worlds between the drape and the stitch definition.
Yeah, so that's super important too, like Natalie said, to look on your pattern is the gauge. And we all know it's something that not everybody wants to do because, you know, not everybody has time to be making, but we can't stress this enough. It's very important, especially if you're making a garment, especially if you're making a beanie or something that you're gonna put on, because it's gonna change completely. And one little row, it doesn't matter, but when you add that to a whole project, it's not one row in that gauge. That's per 4 inches, but then 4 inches, and then 4 and 4, and you complete your project and you end up with, like you said, 2 or 3 4 inches, more or less. More. Yes, and it's completely different. And I say this especially in garments or something that you're wearing, because this stuffy, for example, like I don't care if it was a little bit bigger.
Yeah, it doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter if it's a little bit smaller. You know, it's just a stuffy. Different story if it's the stuffing itself, it's just coming out.
Yes.
You know, that's different, but generally speaking, it's not gonna matter that much.
And if it can be reassuring for people, because I'm a bad person and I don't always gaze swatch.
Oh yeah.
My plan is I'm going to get started with my project, even if I have to do more because I'm not just doing a little square. And then as I go along, I will check my gauge.
Yeah.
Until I get to 4 inches where I can fully confirm my gauge. Full on aware that if it doesn't match, I'm ripping out way more work than if I had just gauged.
Yeah.
But when I don't feel like it, that's what I do. And as you get better and you get more used to following patterns and doing things, I know which designer's gauge I match. So if I've done a couple patterns from them, I don't need to gauge swatch. I know that their gauge is very close to mine and I'm going to be good.
Yeah.
Whereas there's other designer that I'm like, oh no, like she crochets very tightly, she crochets very loosely compared to me. So I know that I'm going to have to gauge swatch and pay more attention.
Yeah.
So as you do more projects, especially if, you know, you find someone that has patterns that you like and you do a couple, you'll get to know whether you need to actually gauge swatch or not. So there is hope that you may not have to do it for every single thing you do.
Yeah, and one little advice from a designer is, if your project does not end up how it should, sometimes it's not the designer's fault. Sometimes it's not that they wrote the pattern wrong or that they didn't do the video correctly. Sometimes you needed to check your gauge before that.
Or your fiber content, or the size of needles that you used, or any of the things that we just talked about.
Yes, so please don't blame us if your project doesn't end up how it should.
I mean, it is possible. I've done patterns that have not turned out properly because there was mistakes in patterns.
Yes,
that can happen. But before you go on blaming the designer, go through
check
all
everything.
The things that we've mentioned and see if perhaps it would not be the designer's fault and perhaps be more something that you might have missed on your end.
Yeah, so we hope you guys enjoy this episode. It was, I think, very informative.
We hope it was informative.
Yeah, we hope it was informative for you guys. We hope it was that you learned something, even if it's the new websites that we mentioned. I hope you get something from this episode.
Yes, and as Annie mentioned earlier, we're going to put the timestamps in the description. So if you've listened to this episode and you're unsure, need to go back and re-listen to certain parts or whatever, you will have the information so you can skip right to it. Mm-hmm. And with that, because we've already busted our tongue,
Yep.
we're going to say we'll talk to you next week.
Yeah, I hope you guys have a great week or rest of your week. And
Actually, Merry Christmas.
already?
Already?
No, not yet.
Yes.
No way.
Once this episode goes live, it's in 4 days.
No way. Okay,
Yes.
Merry Christmas, everyone.
Merry Christmas. And we'll see you again before the new year. Well, we'll talk to you again before the new year.
Yes. Bye.
Bye.